Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, banning Muslims, controversial comments from U.S. Republican frontrunner Donald Trump draw scorn from nearly all his fellow candidates. Will his stance be a winner, though, with voters? And joining us to have this wonderful, intense discussion we are having from Washington in the United States, Mr. Brandon Andrews, who is former U.S. Senate staffer and Republican Party strategist. And also in New York, we have Ms. Laura Schwartz, a professional speaker, author, and television commentator who previously worked for the Clinton administration, obviously a Democrat. Welcome to both of you. First of all,
thank you.
What we are seeing now in the media and the rhetorics coming from the candidates from both parties, should we take them seriously at this point? Mr. Andrews.
Well, what we're seeing is very legitimate concerns by the American people, and honestly concerns shared by other citizens in countries across the world. And unfortunately, there is a leadership deficit currently on these issues of immigration and national security. Now, Donald Trump does not speak for the American people. He certainly does not speak for the Republican Party on these issues. However, what Mr. Trump has done is come in with his big personality and fill a space that honestly should be filled by the man that's sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and not the man that sits at Trump Tower. And so I think what we need is more leadership and more decisive action on these issues from the president and from the national security structure that he leads. If we have that, I think the American people will have more certainty, and that you'll see some more stringent pushback on some of the rhetoric that Donald Trump has been using.
Ms. Schwartz, is Mr. Donald Trump demonstrating any leadership in making remarks like that, not letting Muslims coming into the United States?
No, I think remarks like that only tear down the coalitions that we need with many Muslim countries and Muslims around the world. We have got incredible American Muslims living right here in the United States right now, contributing to America. And the problem is with Donald Trump's language is that it works incredibly well with his Republican support. His support just overnight has gone up 20 points over the other candidates for president among the Republican field. And it's very interesting, as you played the clip of Mr. Cruz, fellow Republican candidate, he just wouldn't quite criticize, because even though the language may be different, many of the ideas have been the same. Other people running in the Republican race, Ben Carson says a Muslim shouldn't become president. Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz say that only Christians from Syria should be allowed in. And Marco Rubio compared Muslims to Nazis. You know, this is a very unproductive conversation when we need to be focused on immigration and entry by visas into the United States by radical terrorists that come in all shapes, sizes, and religions.
And therefore, what does this mean for the overall presidential campaign, as we have seen, which is likely to evolve over the next many months to come? Does that word and this debate at this stage push the whole presidential campaign to a new area, which is debate about religion and debate about immigrants, particularly Muslim immigrants? I mean, Schwartz, where is this presidential election campaign going as a result of this?
It's going downhill. It's going downhill, where we should be uniting coalitions. It's dividing. Not only a chance at a coalition to bring down ISIL in the Middle East, it's dividing Americans here at home. American Muslims are afraid of retaliation against them, law-abiding citizens. We really have to move past just saying we're going to stop letting Muslims into our country, and instead let's focus on the broken visa application system into this country and the broken immigration system in the country. And that applies to everyone, because you know what? The radical terrorists that want to kill Americans and disrupt American life are not only coming from Syria. Many are, but not only. Many may be Muslims or acting under the pretense of being a Muslim, but aren't. So we need to move beyond this, and we have to get much more intelligent in our security, both in the interview process and in the background checks. That, I think, can be a winning issue for Republicans and Democrats to talk about leadership on.
Mr. Andrews, though, do you think what Ms. Schwartz just mentioned could be the reasonable arguments against the extremes, as some say, comments coming from Mr. Trump? Is the American politics going really extreme, as demonstrated by the rhetoric by Mr. Trump, or is it just a dramatic moment out of the many to come in the overall presidential election?
Well, you know, the unfortunate thing about a primary system like we have in America is that candidates on the right and the left will run to the extreme during the primary and try to out conservative and out liberal each other, and then, you know, once we get to the general election, folks start coming back to the more moderate center. Just point blank, Donald Trump's idea does not work practically, and we're not, and I think continuing to talk about it in this way is going to legitimize something that, again, does not sync with American values. You've heard everyone from Paul Ryan to other presidential candidates to Reince Priebus, the RNC chair, denounce this idea and say that it doesn't align with our values, and so that's not something we need. What we do need, however, is a robust discussion of national security, a robust discussion of immigration, and a robust discussion on how the next president plans to balance protecting America with accepting and bringing in folks, as we've done throughout history. And so I look forward to, in the next Republican presidential debate, and as we go into the primaries, certainly in Iowa and into the Northeast, I look forward to a very vigorous debate and to more talk and more depth, I think, of discussion in terms of national security. And I think, you know, some candidates like Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, you know, certainly have credentials there on the Republican side. Certainly, Secretary Clinton has credentials there on the side of the Democrat. And so I'm looking to a very vigorous debate about these issues, and I think this gives us an opportunity to do it.
Ms. Schwartz, being politically incorrect, it seems, at least indicated by Mr. Trump this time with his remarks, is that likely to be the trend of American politics, many wonder? After years of debates, whether it's domestic policies, economy, or international relations, is that likely to be a trend among candidates? If, to some degree, what would that mean?
You know, that is such an intelligent question that I haven't really heard been brought into the discussion. I'm so glad you asked that, because I think it is a trend. And I think it's a trend because when you look at when Donald Trump says such things, his ratings go up. And then you have the front runners that are running next to him not criticizing it because they don't want their numbers to go down. And you start seeing this trend that the big, boisterous, you know, loud man in the room is taking out all the air. And so they all feel like they have to get up to that same height. I think it's really detrimental to politics. You know, Brendan mentioned in primaries the Republicans run to right and run to the left. This is the extreme. This is the extreme. But I believe it's becoming the new norm because for 5 months, Donald Trump has had this messaging, has had this communication strategy. And my gosh, here we are 5 months later, and he's still on top. So I think it's a bit of new normal.
What does that mean, this new normal? How is that reflecting the sentiments of the voters, by the way, Ms. Schwartz? And as a result, are the Democrats likely to readjust its strategies, at least at this stage of the primary? For example, coming from Ms. Clinton, who is certainly the leading candidate so far of the party.
Well, you don't see her having to go extreme, but even when she was down below Bernie Sanders, she wasn't going extreme on that debate stage or in the rhetoric on the campaign. There's always rhetoric, but this is a new reality that we've seen take hold in the Republican side. Now, the Hillary Clinton campaign has and will take advantage of it to their best political advantage to say that this may be the language of one man, but it's speaking for the whole party. And especially when you look at the polls, it reflects what she said earlier this week, and she'll be able to use that on a national debate stage, whether it's Donald Trump standing next to her as the general nominee from the Republicans, or a Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or otherwise. This will be front and center long after the primaries are over.
Right. And therefore, Mr. Andrews, is the Republican Party facing the danger of one man taking down, quote unquote, the whole party when it comes to policies? Especially in this debate, even though Mr. Trump is the leading candidate, but still many wonder whether his road ahead is likely to be bumpy or smooth. That's, I guess, a very legitimate question. But the question, even more importantly, is what would that mean for the overall party image among the voters?
Well, Donald Trump has the personal finances and, of course, the popular support at this point to stay in this race, at least until the convention, if not beyond it. And, of course, he's hinted at perhaps, running as an independent if his Republican bid doesn't work out. I think that sentiment speaks to where we are with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is running as a Republican now, but if it doesn't work out as a Republican, he may run as an independent. Donald Trump doesn't speak for the Republican Party on these issues, and yes, it is incumbent upon Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham and Chris Christie and the other Republican presidential hopefuls to combat this language and to bring us back to civility. One thing that Dr. Ben Carson has said throughout his campaign, and of course he was the GOP leader for a significant amount of time during the fall, has said, hey, we need to return to civility. We need to be able to have these frank discussions about very important issues, but without things devolving into caricature.
But Mr. Andrews, what Ms. Laura Schwartz mentioned earlier is very interesting. You could say he's not representing the party. You could say he's not necessarily going to be the eventual front runner, but you look at his supporting rate, pretty high over the past 5 to 6 months continuously. So what does that mean? How is that reflecting the voters' sentiment? And how is that leading the politics inside your country going? That's very interesting to us from outside the country. Many wonder from this part of the world and else as well, whether American presidential election, particularly the primary stage, has become farce, if not a show. Or show, if not a farce. Mr. Andrews.
Right. Well, so, during my introduction, you mentioned that I spent some time working in the United States Senate, and so we have hearings in the United States Senate, and in fact, we just had the Secretary of Defense go to Capitol Hill and talk to legislators about ISIL and ISIS and about terrorism and about immigration. And the same things that are said about the presidential primary or primaries, whether they're congressional or state level, had been said about hearings on Capitol Hill, that folks play to the cameras, they play to the media, they need to get sound bites in order to stay ahead in the polls. And so I think we definitely have to, and this isn't a Republican or a Democrat thing, but we have a country, definitely have to get more of our citizens engaged in a more in-depth way in the process. And I think when people have more of a depth of understanding, that these sound bites won't carry as much weight as they do now. And then, back again to my original statement, I feel like there is a deficit of leadership on these issues of immigration and national security right now. And whether it's Republican or Democrat, we need to have better ideas, and that's why we need this vigorous debate.
It's not the Americans that are consuming the American elections. It's the populations all over the world that are consuming what is going on in the U.S. presidential election. And that might have an impact on what people think about the United States of America. For example, after Mr. Trump's words, some of his partners, business partners inside the Middle East have taken down the brands that he using his name from all the shelves. That's only one indication. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, for example, people were doing their petitions to ask their parliament to have a debate about whether to allow Donald Trump to be inside their country in the UK in the future legitimately. So these are only some of those examples. Some could be very, you know, in a way, more humorous than the others. Some could be very political than the others. But what would that mean, Ms. Schwartz, if the trend in the primary election going on like this, what does that mean in the U.S. politics for the others from outside the country? That's a very interesting question. And how would that sway people's opinions about the U.S., especially Washington's ability to make decisions and sensible decisions?
Absolutely. You know, to think that Donald Trump is using race-baiting, anti-Muslim rhetoric, and that's working among the Republican Party is very sad when you look at the fact that the United States is living on the backdrop of a globally interdependent world in which Muslim nations and other nations and together filled, I mean, I'm here at the New York City melting pot of America. We've got all religions, all colors, and that's what makes America great. Right. The problem is, all of a sudden you have today, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who criticized Donald Trump for his remarks against Muslims. Now, today, Donald Trump tweets out that he will not meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel until after the elections once he's president. Well, my goodness, the way to start building a coalition for the future of America and the world, to create a safer world, a more educated world, an economically empowered world, whether you're in the far east or the far west, is not this way. And Americans will have a chance to vote on that, but I certainly believe, and I truly hope, that Americans in the end will separate the rhetoric from the reality and look at this on the world stage, not just the small stage that Trump will occupy at auditoriums and rallies, but the world stage and what this means for us as a nation and a global economy moving forward.
Right. I'm feeding some words into your mouth by giving you some supporting evidence of how the world is thinking about it on the party line. So let me do the same with Mr. Andrews as well. Otherwise, it's not fair. You mentioned, Mr. Andrews, earlier, this is a challenge to the establishment of politics inside the United States. People are unsatisfied with what the governance has been over the past 8 years, if not 16 years. So help us to understand, what do you think will go on within your party, the Republican Party, in terms of rhetorics, in terms of how people would strategize the steps forward, given what is happening right now?
Right. Well, I think you will see a whole-scale backlash and pushback at the next Republican presidential debate on Donald
on the
Trump.
16th.
And I think you'll also see, yes, exactly. And I think you'll see, again, candidates that have strong national security backgrounds and strong backgrounds in foreign affairs, like Marco Rubio, again, like Lindsey Graham, and even like Chris Christie to some extent with his experience with 9/11. I think you're going to see these candidates rise to the occasion and push back. Donald Trump, as aforementioned, has the personal resources to stay in this race for as long as he wants to. So there's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is continue to provide legitimate answers to the illegitimate, unfortunately, ideas that he brings up. And I think you'll see that as we go forward in the primary.
Wow.
Donald Trump, unfortunately, is digging holes for himself by offending Muslims, by offending our partners, and by, I guess, patently pushing back on anyone that challenges his ideas, which is not the statement of true leadership.
I'm not sure whether Mr. Trump would agree with your comments, in fact, or whether he wants to meet you anymore in the future. But for now, I want to thank both of you for being with us. Certainly, the election politics very interesting going on inside the United States. Brendan Andrews and Laura Schwartz, thank you so much for being with us. All the best.